He pulled the man over simply for driving an expensive car through the wrong neighborhood. Officer Brad Whitaker thought he was in control until he found out who was really behind the wheel. Turned out, it was the city's new chief of police, here to put an end to stops like this. But just wait until you hear the shocking twist in this story and how justice, in the end, finally won. The southern sun was already blazing by 9 a.m. The air in Montgomery, Alabama, shimmered over the asphalt like a heat mirage. Officer Brad Whitaker, 12 years on the force, sat behind the wheel of his cruiser, one arm resting on the open window, sunglasses catching the glare. To Brad, mornings like this meant one thing: be alert. He wasn't one to take it easy, not when, in his words, you never know what might roll through your town when you're not looking. As he merged onto Interstate 85, his eyes locked onto a black BMW in the next lane. The car was new, too new. Shiny rims, dealer plates, tinted windows just within legal limits. It briefly drifted over the lane divider, barely noticeable. But to Brad, it was enough. "That's suspicious," he muttered, clicking on the lights. The shrill siren cut through the hum of traffic. The BMW's turn signal blinked, and the car glided calmly to the shoulder. Brad parked behind it, took a breath, and stepped out. His hand naturally fell near his holster, not drawn, but ready. Habit, or something deeper. He approached the window slowly, taking in the driver. A black man, mid-40s, well-groomed, dark gray suit, crisp shirt, gold wedding band. Calm, alert, hands placed perfectly on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, like he'd done this before. Brad didn't smile. License and registration. The man complied silently, passing both documents without hesitation. Brad glanced at the license. Nathaniel Brooks. The name struck a strange chord, familiar, like a news headline he'd skimmed but never absorbed. Still, his badge spoke louder than memory. He looked the man over again. "What brings you to this side of town?" he asked, his tone polite but tight, controlled. There was no official reason to escalate, but there was tension in the air, not just a heat. "I'm moving in," the man replied, voice calm, smooth, like someone used to being listened to. Brad gave a short, dry chuckle. "Right, up the hill?" "Correct." Brad tilted his head. "You sure you can afford that place?" There it was, the unspoken undercurrent, now verbalized. Nathaniel didn't flinch, he didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Brad. Not with anger, not with fear, but with something more unsettling: composure. Brad felt something shift, a flicker of uncertainty, like stepping onto a staircase and realizing too late that a step is missing. Then, the radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "All units be advised. Incoming introduction meeting with new Chief of Police, Nathaniel Brooks, scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main hall." Time stopped. Brad's grip on the license tightened. He looked down at the name again. Nathaniel Brooks. He slowly raised his eyes. And this time, when he looked into the man's face, he saw it. The confidence wasn't arrogance. The calm wasn't coincidence. This wasn't just another man in a suit. This was the man who would soon be sitting at the head of every department meeting. And Brad had just pulled him over on the side of the road like a suspect. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Nathaniel? Still silent, still calm, still watching. Brad's hand slipped from his belt, hanging stiffly at his side. He'd just made the kind of mistake you can't write off in a report, and the clock was ticking toward 10 a.m. Brad's jaw locked so tightly it ached. Chief of Police. He looked again, this time really seeing the man in front of him. The flawless cut of his suit, the way the fabric held its form even in the heat. But it was the eyes that did it. Calm, steady, observant. Not defensive, not surprised. Prepared. The truth hit Brad like a wave of ice water, pulling him under before he could breathe. This wasn't some out-of-towner who took a wrong turn. This wasn't just another motorist with a nice car. This was his incoming commanding officer. This was the man who'd be sitting at the front of the conference table, handing out assignments, overseeing misconduct reports, signing off on promotions, or not. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Nathaniel? Still silent, still calm, still watching. Brad's hand slipped from his belt, hanging stiffly at his side. He'd just made the kind of mistake you can't write off in a report, and the clock was ticking toward 10 a.m. Brad's jaw locked so tightly it ached. Chief of police. He looked again, this time really seeing the man in front of him. The flawless cut of his suit, the way the fabric held its form even in the heat. But it was the eyes that did it. Calm, steady, observant. Not defensive, not surprised, prepared. The truth hit Brad like a wave of ice water, pulling him under before he could breathe. This wasn't some out-of-towner who took a wrong turn. This wasn't just another motorist with a nice car. This was his incoming commanding officer. This was the man who'd be sitting at the front of the conference table, handing out assignments, overseeing misconduct reports, signing off on promotions, or not. Brad took a step back from the car, as if the proximity burned him. His voice cracked under the weight of realization. I didn't know, sir." Nathaniel didn't move, didn't blink, didn't smile, just watched. Then, quietly, like someone who'd been waiting for this question to be heard, not spoken, "Do you treat every citizen like that, or just the ones who look like me?" The words didn't rise in volume. They didn't need to. They cut deeper because they were spoken plainly, without anger, but full of truth. Brad's face flushed. It wasn't just the sun. It was the memory. Flashes of 100 traffic stops, the easy jokes in the locker room, the small remarks no one challenged, the assumptions he called gut instinct. And now, all of it, on trial, in the stillness between two men. "I thought," Brad hesitated. "I thought you looked suspicious." Nathaniel opened the door and stepped out slowly, deliberately. His movement was controlled, no sudden gestures, no hostility. But he stood taller now, and not just in height. There was a stillness to him, the kind that doesn't beg for control but owns the space by default. Brad, for the first time in years, felt small. Nathaniel didn't raise his voice, but every word carried weight. "You didn't think. You profiled. You pulled me over because I was black, driving a car you didn't expect to see in that neighborhood." Brad swallowed hard. "No, sir, that's not what I meant." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed just slightly. "It's exactly what you meant." A beat of silence passed, thick and loaded. No sirens, no backup, no paperwork to hide behind. Just two men. One who had held power without ever being questioned, and one who had been questioned every time he dared to hold power. And now, the roles had shifted, forever. Back in the cruiser, Brad slammed the door harder than he needed to. His heart was still pounding, but not from adrenaline, not anymore. From humiliation. He stared out through the windshield, but all he could see was those eyes, calm, knowing, unshaken. For the first time in years, he'd been on the wrong end of the badge, and he knew it. Brad reached for the radio, fingers tense. "Dispatch, Unit 42, status clear." Then he switched frequencies, private channel. Tapped the mic. "You won't believe who I just pulled over." A voice on the other end, Officer Jensen, crackled in. "Go on." "New chief, Nathaniel Brooks." There was a pause, a long one. Then, "You serious?" Brad's voice lowered, sharp. Looked like some high-end lawyer. Car, suit, the whole thing. Didn't tell me who he was, just sat there. Made me look like an idiot. He gave a bitter laugh. Let me off with a lecture. Thought he was better than me. Jensen didn't answer. Brad could feel the silence settling in his bones, not just from the radio, but from something deeper, the unspoken truth. They all knew it was coming. That night, at a worn-down bar off Main Street, Brad nursed a glass with two fellow officers, Michaels and Rudd. The place smelled like fried food and old stories. "He's not from around here," Michaels muttered, stirring his drink. "DC connections. Political guy." Brad leaned back, jaw clenched. "And now he's here to fix us." He said it with air quotes, like it was a joke, but no one laughed. "Accountability," Rudd scoffed. "That's what they're calling it." Brad swirled the whiskey in his glass, eyes distant. He doesn't know this city. He doesn't know how things actually work. But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. Because deep down, Brad knew the game had changed. This wasn't just a new boss. This was a shift in power, a spotlight where there used to be shadows. And Brad, he was used to shadows. Now, the light was blinding. He took another sip. The anger still burned. But underneath it, something colder had taken root. Fear. Not fear of the man himself. Fear of what he represented. A new order. A different standard. And for the first time in a long time, Brad didn't know if he could survive it. 1 week later, the roll call room at the Montgomery Police Department stood unusually quiet. No side chatter. No half-laughed inside jokes. No casual glances at the clock. Every officer, patrol, traffic, investigations, sat in rows, back straight, eyes forward. At the front stood Chief Nathaniel Brooks. He wasn't wearing armor, no anger, no theatrics. Just the uniform, the badge, and a voice that didn't need to rise to be heard. "My name is Chief Nathaniel Brooks." A pause. Controlled. Letting the silence settle, not with tension, but with clarity. "I grew up 10 miles from here, in a part of town where the sound of sirens didn't mean help was coming, where kids didn't wave at squad cars, they crossed the street." He looked out over the room. No one shifted. No one looked away. That ends now. A ripple of stillness moved through the room, as if everyone held the same breath. His eyes scanned the faces, not to intimidate, to establish something deeper. Accountability. And then he found Brad. Their eyes locked. No malice, no satisfaction, just truth. "I will not tolerate profiling. I will not tolerate abuse of power. And I will not tolerate the fear and silence that allow it to continue." He took a single step forward. "That silence is over." And just like that, he turned and walked out. No applause, no ceremony, just the sound of something old breaking and something new beginning. Days later, Internal Affairs opened an inquiry into Officer Brad Whitaker's tragic stops, not because of the press, not because of outside pressure, because it was time. They pulled footage, checked records, reviewed complaints that had collected dust in drawers. Patterns emerged. Stops without cause, warnings instead of citations, but only when the driver looked right. Microaggressions in incident reports, and silences, too many silences, where voices should have been heard. Brad was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Some called it bureaucracy. Others whispered it was overcorrection. A few, the loudest when the doors were closed, called it woke nonsense. But in corners of the department, something else stirred. Relief. Officers who had watched and said nothing now had space to speak. Young recruits saw a leader who didn't wear power like a weapon, but like a responsibility. Civilians started noticing the difference. A pause before assumptions. A new tone at routine stops. In his office, Chief Brooks stood at the window, looking out over the city he once thought would never let someone like him rise. Not because he needed the view, but because he understood what it meant to stand on the other side of the glass and finally belong. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. It was for every kid who was told they didn't fit, for every mother who had to give the talk, for every officer who wanted to serve but didn't know if the system would let them. Now the system had a new voice, and that voice wasn't going anywhere.